Well, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, 5 Best Practices to Prepare for 2016 HR Compliance. My name is Katie Alberti, and as you just heard, I am with OnBase by Hyland, and I focus on our product marketing section for integrations and really focus in that area on our back office solutions, including human resources. And with me today, I have Maria Swarhowski, and she is an HR solution architect here at OnBase by Hyland. And we're also happy to welcome Kaylin Myers, who is a senior system analyst for information services at the Metro Health System. Thank you, Kaylin and Maria, for joining us today. So to kick off this webinar, we're going to divide it into 3 different topics. First, we're going to talk about 5 best practices to prepare for compliance in 2016. We're then going to do a deep dive, and Kaylin's going to present on how Metro Health supports compliance in HR. And then we're going to end with how you can get started with creating your own compliance program in your HR department. So let's start with 5 best practices to prepare for compliance. The first one is going to be no surprise to you, disaster preparedness. Think of all of the employee files, sensitive information, and documents that you have for each person that works at your organization. Now imagine if something were to happen, a tornado, or in this instance, a flood comes through. What are you going to do to ensure that all of this information is stored somewhere in case anything were to happen? Now this picture rings quite close to home for us. This is the University of Colorado had sent this picture. I had been working with their document management supervisor, and 2 years ago, her and I were at a conference together when the great 100-year floods hit Colorado. She works for the University of Colorado in Boulder, and this photo was taken a few blocks away from where the University of Colorado in Boulder sits. And when she was at this conference, she immediately freaked out when she heard about this flooding because she was storing hundreds, thousands of employee documents were all stored in the basement of this building. What happens when something like this occurs? Fortunately for her, she was relieved right away because all of her information, while they still had paper copies of things, they were all backed up on a system in Denver, and they were also stored at a third-party location. So even when a disaster happens, you're prepared for it by backing up all of these different files and keeping them in some kind of electronic system. So in case anything bad happens, you don't have to worry at all about how are you going to get back all of that sensitive and needed information. So just some high-level points about this, but really for disaster recovery, think of a system like enterprise content management, really having a central place to store all this information. And what are you doing with that? You're eliminating that paper storage. What is so valuable about that? We all know that paper is prone to disasters, and it's expensive to maintain as well. When you're using some kind of digital management system, you're able to easily back up and restore all of these documents. So like the University of Colorado had experienced, you're preventing that data loss and you're ensuring that those documents are available at any point in time, no matter what happens. The second one that we're going to talk about is audit preparedness, and Maria is going to take it from here.
Thanks, Katie. So when we talk about best practices for compliance in 2016, it's really important to talk about how we can prepare for an audit in order to maintain compliance. So when preparing for an audit, preparation is really key. We want to make sure we have we can prepare through robust searches with different reporting capabilities, and only give the auditor access to what they're asking for. So when you're preparing for an audit, you want to really think about how you're giving the auditor access to those documents, how you're able to quickly and easily search for those documents, and just being able to really prepare for those next steps. So when we've all gotten this email. It's the dreaded audit email, just letting us know that we have, some documents that we need to prepare for that auditor. Generally, they ask for a list first to ensure that you have those documents. And then later on, they may request additional information to really dive a little bit deeper into those documents and making sure that they're complete. So we receive this email, and what does an HR department do? They freak out and run around. So this is usually the next step that happens. They run around trying to gather all that information, making sure that they can put a complete report together, get that information over to the auditor, and again, only give them access to what they've asked for specifically. So let's talk about some best practices for audit compliance. So when we're talking about audit preparedness, there's really a few best practices for reporting requirements. The first is to identify missing documents. Ideally, you want your enterprise content management system to provide you with the functionality to run a quick report to identify if the system is missing a document type. So, for instance, run a report to make sure that you have I-9s for every single employee in the system. So in this case, what you're seeing on the screen here is the ability to see that report and see that we do have I-9s missing for this set of documents. It's also important to be able to run this type of report, not just on one type of document, but on a group of documents as well. So you could also maybe run a search to highlight the new hire paperwork for an employee and run a report to make sure you have completeness in all of those documents. It's also important to identify those missing documents, but you need to be able to make sure the existing documents that you have in your ECM system are working for you as well. So you want to have the ability to search for groups of documents quickly at any time. Really, this is very important for internal audits to make sure that you're running these audit practices ahead of time to prepare for that horrible situation when you are faced with a real life audit. You want to make sure you're ensuring that you have 100% of those employee documents to remain compliant. And this can be done regularly as a maintenance as you prepare for that audit. So a best practice, again, is to be able to search for a group of documents just to be able to speed up that audit process. And that's what we're seeing here on this screen, is the ability to search on the left-hand side for a group of documents, let's say for HR audit request. It's pulling up a group of documents, which are those I-9 and W forms that the auditor requested on our previous screen. Once you've identified that group of existing documents that the auditor is requesting that general information on, your ECM system should provide you with the ability to quickly run reports on those existing documents and then allow you to manipulate those reports so that you can present that information that the auditor requested. So for ease of use, it's really ideal if the system integrates with your email. So for instance, Microsoft Outlook or also Microsoft Office, just for ease of use. So for example, what we're looking at here is the ability to export that information on those forms to Excel and then being able to manipulate that data. We see this with customers who are interested in manipulating the data for that initial audit step to remove the identifying information of those employees and, let's say, just give the auditor access to the employee ID number and then those document types that they're requesting additional information on. After the auditor has reviewed that general information regarding those documents, they usually ask to see individual documents for further review. So for best practices for HR compliance, your ECM system should have the ability to provide auditors with self-service access to the files they need. And again, only the files that they have requested information on, nothing more. So you need to have really tight security around what documents you're giving them access to, and then the functionality that we're giving them access to on those documents as well, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So ideally, your ECM system really should have the ability to dynamically create the folders and then drag and drop documents into those folders. So for example, the auditor requests a certain set of documents for one employee ID, and you can quickly search for that group of documents. You can create a folder for that employee ID, and then you can drag and drop those documents into the folder. Then you're going to be able to give that auditor limited access only to that folder. So best practice here, be able to give them that access while they're on site or remotely as well. And it's important to also mention that you don't want to compromise the integrity of those documents. So one great best practice is really being able to have a full audit trail on each document to show who's viewed the document, what they've done with the document, the date, the time. Having all of that recorded will show you later on whether or not the auditor has viewed those documents kind of as you move through the process. So what you're seeing here on the screen is just selecting those documents, creating that employee folder based on employee ID, and then dragging and dropping those documents into the folder to give the auditor access.
And that's huge, Maria. I think that's so valuable that you've touched on that. One of the things that I've heard from several people who use an ECM system, one of the biggest benefits is that audit trail. And, I know when you hear that you have an audit, like Maria said, you think about freaking out and running around. But one of the things that I've really started to see is when I talk to customers who use ECM for this, they're not even preparing for audits anymore. They've got everything ready for them. I've had different steel manufacturers that have talked to me about this when I say, how do you prepare for an audit now? And they laugh and say, I don't have to do anything because everything is automatically tracked. They know who's seen what, they know who has access, and they have it all set up so that auditor can come right in. And it's a much less stress environment.
Absolutely. And those searches that we talked about earlier, being able to grab those groups of employee documents, once you're setting those searches up in an ECM system, you have access to those searches going forward. You don't have to set it up every time an auditor comes in. And since we generally know ahead of time what types of documents an auditor is looking for, it's really easy to set up those searches so that, yes, you're right. Once an auditor comes in, we don't even have to do any work beforehand. So once we have, an ECM solution in place, we're able to really ensure that we have 100% of those employee documents to remain compliant. And having this feeling of confidence going into an audit is just going to, not only does it reduce that administrative burden, the ECM practices, but you have that confidence that you have all the documents you need, and again, kind of eliminating that running around period that most of us do in HR when we're faced with an audit. Having an ECM system in place to manage this audit preparedness for you helps you avoid those costly fines. When you have the confidence going into an audit that you have those documents in place and you're able to give the auditor access and that they remain complete, you can avoid those fines, which will ultimately save the company money and make your HR department happy. So we also have, that pre-audit prep that Katie mentioned. You don't need to do that when you have a great ECM system in place. You've done all that work ahead of time, and you can let the ECM solution do that for you. And again, I think the most important thing to highlight is the ability to really provide that limited, secure access for that auditor. Only give them access to the documents that they were looking for. Nothing else, just so you don't open yourself up to additional risk during the process. So now Katie's going to talk about our third best practice.
Yeah, so I-9 compliance. So I'm sure a lot of you out there that are listening to this are nodding your head that I-9 compliance is definitely something that you're thinking about. And we hear about it all the time here at Highland as well. But just to give you some perspective about I-9s and audits, if you are familiar with the SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, one of the things that they reported on before was that I-9 audits are on the rise. And if we go back to 2004, the federal government only did 3 audits for I-9 compliance. Now let's fast forward to 2012, and there were over 3,000 I-9 audits completed by the federal government. That is about a 100,000% increase, and it continues to be on the rise today. And why this is so important and why having some kind of ECM system in place is so valuable for this is the costly fines that can be associated with any problems with this. So think about those crazy retention periods for these, right? It's for the first 3 years that you have someone that joins your company, or up to a year after they leave your company, whichever one is longer. How do you know when to pull old I-9s from your system? If everything is in paper, how can you ensure that you're purging those documents when they need to be? And why does this matter? Perfect examples, we have a customer who didn't have any kind of system in place and did this all manually, and they had an I-9 audit. And what happened? They pulled old I-9s that shouldn't have been in their system anymore. Some of them had errors on it, and as a result, they got fined for these. So by just having old I-9s in your system when you no longer need them, they can still come back to haunt you. You can still get fines for this. If any of you attend SHRM, you know this has been a huge topic at their conferences, and you hear of companies losing half of their profit for the year on an I-9 audit. So really having some kind of system in place really helps with this. So the federal government has these guidelines for I-9 storage, and most of them can sound so technical, or we don't have the money to do this, but when you do something like implementing ECM, you can really transform how this is all taken care of. But you can see their guidelines include having a detailed index of all data on any particular record so it can be accessed, ensuring there's that audit trail that Maria talked about so they can see any change that's happened to these I-9s, and really including controls to detect and prevent unauthorized creation or alteration or deletion of that form. So there's all of this in place. And really, the value of ECM is it's going to help revolutionize this area for you. Why? As Maria showed you, utilizing that reporting to determine what information is missing. Also being able to purge those old I-9s when you no longer need them. Like I said, that's huge. Think of all those errors, those potential errors that could be on them, and all the money you could have to spend for documents you shouldn't even have to begin with. And also providing auditors with that self-service access that they need to those files. So instead of freaking out and running around and trying to figure out what are we going to do, you have everything already. That auditor can come in, they're going to look at up-to-date ones, and your ECM system can help ensure that you're filling them out correctly so that you're not going to get any of those costly fines. And next, we're going to go on to 4, which is security, which we all know in HR, this is of utmost importance, but you got to make sure that all of this sensitive employee information is secure. So really, you want to be able to determine what can your HR staff see, and an ECM system can really help you with this to set up what document types can certain HR professionals see. Are there different search capabilities that they have? Can they see notes on a document? Can they look at the document history? Can they participate in specific workflow tasks associated with that? So by using an ECM system, you can put these parameters in place to really help ensure that security of your information.
And when we talk about enterprise content management systems and how, and that security piece, it's important to know, at least for HR organizations, that that security, and Katie's going to talk about the other piece of that granular security that an ECM system should have, but that security can be role-based, because we know within an HR department there's not going to be the same security for, let's say, a recruiter as there might be for an HR VP, as there might be for an HR VP. So that security should absolutely be able to be role-based as well, not just what that staff can see, but Katie's
absolutely. So just like Maria said, what can your HR staff do? So who is able to go in and create new documents, create new forms? Who can rename, update, delete, any of those things? But you can divide it by that role and add those different levels of security so that you know that your HR system is secure. You can even set up parameters to ensure that your IT staff doesn't have access to those documents. That's always of utmost concern. And the beauty with this, too, and I don't have a slide on this, but the great thing, too, with this is you could do this in a secure on-premise environment or also a cloud-based environment as well. So I know a lot of HR departments look to go into the cloud and just know that it's got that tight control as well and that security that you're looking for. And then finally, and we've talked about it before, but the value of these audit trails, but just having every action documented on what's take place on a piece of paper, holds your staff accountable to make sure that they're doing things properly, and you're ensuring that preparedness in the event of an audit by having all of this stuff traceable is going to stop you from freaking out and running around when that takes place. And then finally, the fifth one Maria is going to talk to us about is policies and procedures.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the fifth best practice for HR compliance, and I want to challenge all of you to think about this going forward in 2016 because I speak to a lot of HR departments that have a lot of great solutions for some of these other pieces, but it's the policies and procedures where they kind of get stuck. So, you know, maybe they have a solution for onboarding and that new hire paperwork, those employee-specific documents, but those non-employee-specific documents, a lot of departments are still kind of chasing their employees down with a paper and pen. Let's talk about kind of what policies and procedures looks like in a company before an ECM solution. So generally, there isn't a central location to manage those policies. They're maybe on somebody's C drive or on someone's desktop, or they're housed in different departments. That's not a great way to kind of be able to have those all managed in one place. There's also no way to manage that pre-distribution piece, so the creation and approval of those policies, which is so important. The employees, once they sign those policies, generally don't have access to those signed documents, and that can result in inquiries to HR, which, can be, a huge administrative burden, kind of wading through all those inquiries, looking up the documents, sending them back to the employees. And it just is such a time-consuming and manual process to even track all the acknowledgments of those documents. There's no way to say, okay, who is delinquent on this policy? Can I quickly email all those delinquent individuals? Generally, we have, and even here at Highland, the way that we manage policies and procedures before implementing an ECM solution was we had our HR manager at the time who would have a piece of paper, and it would be that signed policy. She would grab the last piece of paper of that policy, chase down those individuals in the company with a pen, and have them go ahead and sign that policy. Then she would scan it in the system, track the acknowledgments that way, create manual Excel reports, even have to create email lists to email those delinquent users. So it just wasn't a quick policy, or it wasn't a quick process, rather. So with an ECM solution for policies and procedures, really you're tackling both parts of the policies and procedures process. So first, that pre-distribution piece, the creation, review, and approval of those policies, and then the distribution piece as well. So where the employee gets to view that policy and acknowledge that policy as well, and then the ECM system is then recording that acknowledgement. So generally we see companies with an approval hierarchy, leveraging some workflow to manage the pre-distribution piece, so the creation and approval of that policy. And then once that policy is approved, HR determines who needs to acknowledge it, and it's distributed to the entire company if they need to, like for, say, maybe an employee handbook, or one group at a time within the company.
I love this example, too, and I often use it in presentations because it really resonates, I think, with people in HR. I've spent a lot of time with a steel company named Gallatin Steel in Kentucky, and you've got it's a steel company, a steel manufacturer. You've got people working on all of this heavy machinery, all of this dangerous equipment. Now, their HR staff was spending 80 hours a month trying to put together updates to different policies and procedures. And what they would do is once they get an update, they'd have, this whole policy, which might be like 20 pages long. A manager would go down to the pulpit where everyone's working on these machines, and he'd say, hey, guys, I need you all to review and acknowledge this policy, report that you've signed that you've acknowledged it, and then go back to work. Well, think of when you're in the middle of doing a job, especially a job with machinery, one, you're probably not going to take the time to stop. You're busy with your job. But two, if you do take the time, you're probably just going over, looking at it very quickly and signing off, and that's it. So they had a very difficult time tracking this, and it's huge for them to ensure safety at their company. Well, after struggling with this for a while, Gallatin decided to implement an ECM system to help with this and to help with this policies and procedures. Now, their HR department spends barely any time uploading any of those new updates to a policy. And then what they've done is they've created an employee portal. So any of that staff, once they hear of an update, when it's downtime for the machine shop, if they have downtime for that, if they're on their lunch break, whatever, they can go sign into this employee portal, and it's going to pull up those policies right away that they need to review. And Gallatin took it a step further and highlighted all changes in red. So, while they hope that people are going to read that entire policy, at least they can ensure that they know people are going to be drawn to what's new, to that highlighted part. Then that person just acknowledges it, hits a button, it automatically sends that back to HR and their manager, knowing that they're in compliance with it. And then you can create the report of delinquent ones, which I think here at Highland is some of our HR staff's favorite use, is that you can go and start tracking down those people who are delinquent. You can continuously send them emails. You can escalate it to a higher manager, and that's what Gallatin was able to do. And when I asked, how do you prepare for audits as a result with this now, he laughed and said, I don't have to do anything because I'm tracking all of this now within an ECM system. I know everyone's reviewing it, and we're good to go.
Absolutely. So I think, whether it's a portal or an email that goes out to the company, an email notification that goes out to individuals in the company that, they have a policy or procedure that they need to read and acknowledge, what they're going to do is, receive that email or go to that portal and then open the policy. And once the policy is opened, they're presented with that policy. They will be able to read through that document, and of course, other best practices. I mean, if you want to make sure that you can prove that it was this individual who read and acknowledged that policy, before they're able to click that acknowledge button at the top of the screen, what we can do is we can have them, be required to scroll to the bottom of the page, or you can add a test at the end to test their comprehension of that document. But it's really the ability to, present them with a document, have them review and acknowledge it, and then, confirm that it was them, that individual that has reviewed and acknowledged that document. And then that policy is stored in the ECM system in that central location, making it easy to retrieve. But not only is that policy stored, but we've tracked the acknowledgments as well. And Katie talked about this a little bit, but I want to kind of touch on this a little bit more. So the acknowledgement for that individual employee is tracked in the system, but HR has a view not just of those individual employees, but of all employees that policy or procedure has been sent to, and what the status of each employee is on that document. So we can see the users on the left-hand side. We can see the status, whether that user is delinquent in acknowledging that policy, the date that it was made available, the date that they acknowledged it. And of course, you should be able to really configure this list to meet your needs so that you can control what you're tracking in the system. So after implementing an ECM solution, for policies and procedures, you'll have that central location for the policies. You'll be able to manage not just the distribution of the policies, but that pre-distribution as well. Employees are able to access those signed policies so they can log in and say, okay, where's my list of policies that I have signed and acknowledged over the years, and can I read through those again and verify? I mean, for me, sometimes I have to go back and review the travel and expense policy if I'm traveling, And just giving them that access to those signed policies as well reduces that administrative burden on HR. They're not having to go out and send those policies constantly to employees when they ask about them. And then tracking those acknowledgments, is huge. We want to make sure that we're remaining compliant, and we also, when faced with litigation, of course, that's never a fun thing to be faced with, but if we are faced with litigation, we can go back and say, yes, this employee did, in fact, acknowledge this document, and here's our proof that they've done so. And again, Katie mentioned the absolute favorite of policies and procedures, and that is that email delinquent option. So additional benefits for policies and procedures, being able to have that accurate acknowledgement for reporting for compliance. So if you have HR VPs or other VPs or C-levels within the company that are interested in tracking those policies and making sure that employees have acknowledged them, having that robust reporting capability is important as well. Also reducing the administrative burden on the HR department, as we mentioned. It's nice whenever you can do that, since HR kind of gets swamped with emails. I can say that as a former HR employee. And then, again, ensuring you have 100% of those employee documents to remain compliant. Often policies and procedures are a big part of that. So we want to make sure we're able to track and acknowledge those documents. And, again, did we mention that you can email delinquent users with just one click? Because that's all it takes, just one click to email that whole list of delinquent users.
I always joke, too, here at Highland, we did have a policy in place where if you didn't do training once a month, delinquent emails after so long finally went to the CEO. So we always knew that we had to prepare and be ready to go. Because if we were delinquent, our CEO would know all about it. So now we're going to change gears, and we're really going to talk with Kaylin, who's going to give us a case study and really explain how Metro Health supports compliance using an ECM system. So go ahead, Caitlin.
Hello. So Metro Health has been using OnBase for over 10 years now, and some of the departments or some of the areas within our HR department that benefit from an ECM solution would be our benefits, workers' comp, employee assistance program, labor relations, and there's some few others on the screen. The nice thing about this is all these areas within HR are all audited, and not only do we have external audits that come in, we also have an internal audit department. So that's nice to have this available, all paperless, for any type of audit that they may be asked for. So even though it is wonderful once you have it, there is still work that needs to be done to set everything up. So Metro Health currently has over 6,000 active employees, and we also had well over 2,000 separated employees. So we had all those as paper charts, and we had to determine how we were going to scan them, what we were going to call them, where they were going to go, who would have access to them, if we were audited, what documents should they see or should they not see. So there was a lot of work to kind of be done in the beginning stages just to make sure everything's mapped out for your future. In our ECM system, we have it integrated with our Lawson ERP system. So that way when they're in OnBase and they are scanning the documents, they're able to plug in an employee ID number and the employee's information will populate. This saves a lot of time to index the document, so when you are audited, you can easily find it. Also, though, just the amount of time, so nobody is keying in the person's first name, last name, and then there's always, unfortunately, user errors, and something could be mistyped. So to have that integration with your ERP system is also very beneficial. So just kind of an example of some of the folders that we have set up within our solution and where the documents fall. We actually created 17 tabs within our HR folder. So as me coming into Metro Health, I'm a new employee, I have to fill out certain forms, and then those were scanned in, and they would fall under these tabs so it's easier to find. Very similar to how the paper file cabinet was when we started this project. And so this is just kind of an example of what our foldering system looks like today. You can see that there's an employee record on the left-hand side of the screen. The nice thing about this is, especially when you are being audited, when they're looking at the screen in red at the bottom left-hand corner, we've indicated what forms are missing. So that is definitely a very big red flag that something should be in this folder and it is not, which you would not want to see that during an audit. So that's a kind of a good check to have in advance to kind of go through your employee records to make sure no documents are missing.
And I think what's great here too is that you have in this one screen, you've got this holistic view of this information. So you can see right away what information is missing. So then you can go hunt that down or talk to that person and get that info right away. So it's HR is no longer searching through a filing cabinet and trying to see, okay, like you said, you've got these 17 different areas that you have in this folder, trying to track down those 17 pieces of paper by just going through paper folders has got to be very time consuming. So having this quick look is such a quick win for an organization trying to support this compliance.
It definitely is. And another nice thing about Metro Health is actually our HR department is divided amongst two different buildings. They're about 5 miles away from each other, but if you have an auditor on site, you obviously don't want to be driving back and forth to building to get these paper records or try to, you know, grab them in advance. So it's nice when you do have kind of a decentralized area that you have, you know, quick access to it everywhere. You don't need that paper right in front of you.
You don't need to run around trying to find it everywhere.
That was a very large pain point that no longer exists for us. Another nice benefit when there is an audit or even any HR representative, if they're working in the ERP system, they do not need to then jump over and open their OnBase screen. They can actually just use the control button and their mouse and do a keystroke, and that will actually open the list of documents for that employee when they're on the HR 11 screen.
So that's really cool. So just working right there in Lawson, you said with just a keystroke, they can then pull up all of that related information that is stored in your ECM system. So instead of you're taking it a step further, it seems, than just having everything electronic, but that you also can just click a button instead of going to another application. All that information is presented to you.
I know for a lot of HR departments that I talk to, this kind of eases the adoption of an ECM system within the HR department, right? Because they don't have to leave the familiar interface of their HRIS. Right. They can simply have that ECM system serve up those documents while they're still on their, you know, very familiar screen.
Yeah, so they're not learning an entire other system that they need to use. They're able to just stick with that familiar application, but they get all of these different benefits.
That's funny because a few people I've asked, you know, what do you think about OnBase? And they're like, I don't use OnBase. I'm like, you're in the Lawson screen and you're looking at employee records. Those are in OnBase. So some people don't even realize it because it's such an easy integration, a tight integration that they don't even realize they're looking at documents in a completely different system. At our organization, we do use dual monitors just for easier to read, easier to see. So that's the best practice that we recommend when you're starting to build the solution. And then another nice thing is that, you know, things change. People's jobs changes, people's names change. So when you do have a document that does require some type of change, you are able to send those documents through a workflow queue, and now those documents can be processed automatically and sent to the right person automatically. So you no longer have that paper form you're filling out, and then you're handing it to this person in HR to update your ERP system, and then you're handing it to payroll to update your paychecks or wherever the case may be. It just makes the process a lot easier, and then for audit reasons, you can kind of see all the steps and who did it and, you know, did anything get missed. And then there's different task button that, you know, if you have a document that you're looking at, you can always send it to somebody else if it needs additional approval or review.
So that's nice as well, that within that one screen, you're able to do all of those different controls as well.
Another nice thing is, because of the integration that we have set up at Metro Health, if somebody's name does change or their title changes, we actually do have that information coming to our ECM system. It does update all the documents for us, and there is no manual process for that. So if an auditor did come in and they're looking for John Smith, that's a bad example, Jane Smith, and then she got married and now she's Jane Myers, we actually keep both last names in the system, so that way they're easily being able to retrieve their documents. I think maybe somebody had mentioned this on the call earlier. We are using our report services module, so you can run a report of, who's viewed certain documents, what documents a particular employee has on file, and there's tons of reporting things that you can do instead of keeping that Excel document where somebody's updating who's delinquent, who's not delinquent. There's reporting tools for that you don't have to have such a manual process for this. So this slide just basically explains, when we are audited, we have the auditors come in, we send them at a computer, they have a specific username and password they log into, and then they see the documents that we want them to see.
So what's audit prep like? Is there a lot for it, or is it really handled with ECM?
It is handled with ECM. We do not need to prep for anything. We just have our, designated username and password that the auditors use, and there's nothing else we have to do.
And those documents never have to leave that site. You're giving the auditor access to those documents, which I think is great because, I've talked to some companies who maybe are sending those documents out. Maybe they're emailing documents. That really does compromise the integrity of the document. So I think it helps with that, HR focus on security to really be able to keep a tight leash on those documents and even, in real time hand those to the auditor, rather, who's sitting there with you that day. It's great.
Yep, absolutely.
And so finally, you've heard a little bit about how Kalen and Metro Health are using ECM. So it's really, like you've heard, it's, streamlining access to information, making sure that you're prepared in the case of an audit, having that automatic audit trail for everything that happens with the document, being able to ensure that you're prepared in case any kind of disaster were to happen. But you can see how in one organization you've really helped to change the game at Metro Health. So instead of hunting for those 17-plus documents in a manual paper-based system, you've got it all right there, and that one complete look at that employee file, and are really able to ensure that you've got that security, you've got everything you need in place, and it's going to, limit fines, any of that stuff, any of the headache that you're worried about in HR. So really, the final step here is, how can you get started with your own compliance program? And so, how can you support compliance in 2016? I encourage you to start with the basics and expand over time. So we've spent a lot of time talking to you about how you can implement an ECM system, and a lot of time when people think about ECM, it seems so overwhelming, right? It's that enterprise in it, that enterprise content management, and it becomes very overwhelming to think about. But when you take a step back and actually think about some basic things that you could do with the system, you can really change the game and revolutionize your own HR department. So first and foremost, it's digitizing those employee files. So by using something like an ECM system, you're going to capture all of that information, most of which your ECM system can automatically pull that data right off of those paper files, and you're going to store them in the central document repository. So you're taking all of that content that you're getting from emails, documents and forms, filing cabinets, in trays. You're putting it all in this one secure area that needed HR personnel can access when needed. You're storing it there for however long you need to for compliance purposes. And then when it's about to expire or you no longer need those documents, your ECM system is going to automatically purge them for the system, or they're going to ask you if you'd like to review a document and then purge it if you give permission to do so.
And actually, Kaylin mentioned this earlier, but those employee files, a lot of companies have those paper-based files. But, you know, it's important when you're kind of organizing those files, those employee files from paper-based to electronic files, you want to make sure that you're using a system that lets you mirror your current file system today. So that a best practice there is taking those paper-based files, you know, however that employee file looks with however many folders involved in that employee file, and then moving that over into your ECM system so that it eases the adoption from paper to electronic files for that HR department who might be a little bit resistant to that change. They like holding their paper files in their hand. They like the different folders that are involved there. Really being able to dictate what that employee file looks like within that enterprise content managed system, I think, is the best practice.
Absolutely, and I think, too, you can set up that structure so that it mirrors what your physical system looked like before. And as Kaylin mentioned, you know, if they're used to working in your specific line of business application, for Metro Health, that's Lawson, being able to stay in that system as well, but have the ability to access all that content is a major game changer as well. Now, if you're thinking about, well, it sounds great to digitize these files, but I have so many thousands of documents, how do I do this? Well, you want to look for a provider that can help you with this. But you want to look for someone that can help you with this. So you want to be able to meet with someone who has the flexibility to help with those scanning or indexing needs. So there are many providers out there who have imaging services departments that will, you know, they can come on site, do the back file scan for you. You can send them out to a company and they will handle it all for you. They'll scan and index those documents and send them back to you as well. But there are several ways that you can get this back file conversion done, and that seems to be the biggest challenge that I find with a lot of HR departments is, this sounds great, but how do I start? And really one of the easiest places is digitizing these documents, but finding a way to do so that meets your needs. Sometimes it means hiring an additional person, temporary staff on for so long to help do that. It might be carving out some time every month where your staff is taking the time to scan in all those HR files. But you can also look for that third-party vendor that can do this for you too. And several of them out there, including Highland, have a commitment to helping to improve your HR operations. And will do so by abiding by any of your rules and regulations for managing this data.
And sometimes, I mean, too, if it's very overwhelming to think about all of those files and getting them into the system, one approach we see is to digitize files on a go-forward basis. So from January 1st forward, we're going to have all our files, you know, within the enterprise content management system, and then we'll chip away at those other files as we have time.
Absolutely. Whatever is going to work the best for you, but just know that you don't have to do it alone. If you're feeling overwhelmed about it, there are vendors out there that are willing to help you work through this process, be it you rely on them for it or they kind of coach you through this process and how you should do it on your own. And then we also wanted to talk about what is Metro Health's ECM expansion plans and what's your advice, what are your tips and tricks, Kaylin, for people that are attending this today on how they can get started with this kind of program?
There's so many different things to look at when you're doing this, and, you know, like I said, we set this up a long time ago, so we are definitely looking at, I'll say, a phase 2 approach. You know, there's paper documents today that even though, yes, we're scanning them, we're getting them in the system, we're making it as easy as possible, they're linking to our ERP, we want to make these forms electronic. Why even make the employee go down to the HR department, grab this paper document? So some of those would be like the tuition assistance application. That does not need to be a paper document, and that goes through routing approvals with their managers, and then they have to hand it to a manager to approve it, and then they hand it to our HR department to approve the class that you took, to reimburse you for it, things like that. So we're looking at adding that functionality, that paperless functionality to our HR process to replace the paper, save money on the paper, the audit trails there, just to make that process easier. We have the dependent eligibility documentation. Again, that's another one. Let's make it paperless. Let's put the security around it. Make sure the people that see it are the people that need to see it. Physician wage increase memos, those are all paper documents that get printed out. How can we change that? How can we want to email it to them. We want to, again, remove the paper, add the extra security feature in there, make sure other managers or directors that are over the departments where the physicians are at know that these things are going on.
And I think, taking those paper forms and converting them into electronic forms and being able to push them through those workflows and get those approvals really just helps with, maximizing the efficiency of that HR department and the accuracy in which they process those different processes.
Absolutely.
And so let's jump into, what is some of your advice for the people attending today that if they want to get started with some kind of digital transformation process?
So kind of, actually, I think you guys both touched on this. So the big thing for us was we grabbed the paper file. We grabbed an employee's paper folder, and we went through it. Okay, what are these documents? How many do we have? How many are just kind of one-off, or what are consistent forms? How long do we need to keep them for? The I-9s, for example. And then also, at Metro Health, the old process was any documents HR documents that belong to VP were in a folder that was then put in an envelope, and the envelope was sealed. And as somebody wrote VP on the outside of it. So if that envelope was opened, then that was a concern because who was looking at a VP record? Because not everybody is allowed to see those. So just kind of understanding the process, talking to the users who are in these files all day long, is really your best starting piece. And then what we did is we had a binder of all the documents, and as we were scanning them, we just kind of started making notes. Okay, we have 10 of these, we have 20 of these, and there's some research that you have to put behind it, but that's what's going to make your solution last, and you won't have to change it or fix it in the long run.
So doing that due diligence
Exactly.
up first is definitely what's needed.
So yeah, I kind of touched on that already, but really, what's your paper process today? How can we make the paper processes OnBase or the ECM solution as close to your paper process so it is an easy adoption?
That's great. And finally,
and then lastly, just with the audit, who's responsible for scanning this? Who's responsible for indexing? Who can review the documents, retrieve the documents, modify them, delete them, edit them? All those things need to be looked at so that way the right people are looking at the right things.
So, it sounds like, there's a lot of work that you have to do up front, mapping out, how these folders are going to look at everything, but it's worth it, correct?
It's worth it.
Once you've identified that kind of who, what, when, where of all of those documents and processes, then you only need to do that really one time, and then the ECM solution will do the rest of the work.
Exactly. So, again, for Metro Health, we did a back scan of all our files and a current scan. It took us 10 months to figure everything out, scan all the documents. There was over 1 million pieces of paper to scan, index them, map everything through. But now we don't make any changes. The system runs itself. We actually were able to even eliminate 2 full-time positions because of how efficient we're running now.
That's wonderful to hear. And then finally, if you're looking for more information, if you're interested in learning about ECM, I encourage you to visit onbase.com/HR, where you'll find these solutions that we've talked about today. So really, employee file management, digitizing all of those employee records for you. You're also going to find policies and procedures that Maria talked about. And you'll hear about some of our other offerings that we have for HR as well. And with that, we thank you for attending, and we'll open it up to any questions that there are out there. And so the first one is, I have heard and I hear this all the time, is you've got an HR system, you want to use it for ECM and HR, but is that really the only place that you can use an ECM system? And the short answer is no. There are tons of places where you can leverage ECM. You may start in HR and you may start with digitizing those employee files, and then you could do something like policies and procedures as well, but we've seen some people then move on to onboarding and offboarding capabilities with ECM, and really expanding it into other departments as well, especially in the back office. Everyone can value from the system. So if you think of cost being a prohibitor, which you hear often in HR, one of the great things with enterprise content management is that it serves the enterprise. So if it's difficult for one department to get buy-in, team up with others. Team up with accounts payable. That is one place that finds tremendous ROI with an ECM solution. So for looking for areas that can use the system besides just HR is a great place to start too. And I'll see if we have any other questions, and if there are, please feel free to send them to the Q&A. So one question that we have is, what documents is a company required to keep, original documents versus presenting copies of an original one? So Maria and Kaylin, I'm looking to you both. Do you have to keep that original physical paper file all the time, or are you okay to present a copy of an original? So I would think of I-9s for an example. Can you have an image that an auditor can look at, or do you need that actual paper file?
So at Metro Health, our policy states that as long as we do a quality assurance on our paper files after they're scanned in, we do not need to keep that paper. So we keep it for 10 days just to make sure, that it's scanned, the quality assurance was really done, it is linking to our ERP system, and then we destroy it. The I-9s, however, though, we do keep them electronic and on paper. I think that rule actually has changed, is my understanding, but we'd like to be cautious, I guess.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the document, and it depends on the requirements in that organization, but we're seeing more and more, and even with I-9s, that companies are moving away from holding on to those paper documents and just relying on the electronic files.
Another question that we got is, how long is the retention for an I-9, which it's crazy retention policies, but from what I know, it's when someone starts with your organization, you need to keep it for the first 3 years, or if they leave your company, up to a year after they leave, whichever one is longer. So it's very confusing. So it's a crazy retention period. So how do you ensure that you're keeping all the proper ones on file that you need and purging them from the system when you no longer need them? Like I said, because there are tons of fines that can be accrued by keeping these older I-9s when you no longer need them. So definitely making sure that you're aware of these type of retention policies for that and the other documents that you need to store, like W-4s. You want to make sure that you do that as well. And another question that we got was, what size organizations benefit from using an ECM system? And really, I'll let the team here chime in, but I found that it's organizations of all sizes can benefit from it in some way. Maria, I don't know if you want to touch on, you've been in HR and you're out there talking to a lot of prospects.
Sure. I mean, I think we see, many different organizations of all different shapes and sizes using ECM systems and benefiting from them. So, it might be different pieces and parts. Everybody has files for employees. So that's a great place to start for any sized organization. And then from there, it's just kind of building out that roadmap of what's important to your organization to tackle next. So if you're a very large organization and you're onboarding a lot of employees every year, then you might want to focus on an onboarding solution, or conversely an offboarding solution as well. We have a customer who uses an onboarding solution to onboard over 50,000. It's like hard for me to even say that out loud because that's so many individuals, but 50,000 new hires every year. So, and we also have, customers who are using that same type of solution for a lot smaller amounts of customers. So it's really just scaling out to see how that ECM solution can meet your needs and building out the roadmap to identify, what problems you're having with different process, where the bottlenecks are, and then using ECM to, help within that HR department, but then enterprise-wide across the organization as well.
And we are out of time. Real quick, one of the questions that I've seen coming up here a lot is, will these slides be available after this presentation? And yes, they will be available, and they will be sent to you. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we will try to follow up with you. And we thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you learned something. Thank you, Kaylin, for coming from Metro Health, and thank you, Maria, and thank you all for attending, and have a great day.